The war had taken everything from Tharnia. Once a shining empire of thousands of planets, it now lay scarred, its fleets shattered and its people haunted by loss. The Tharnian king, Vareth, sat alone in his darkened throne room, staring at the vast view of burning skies through the tall crystal windows. His heart ached, and a cold emptiness had settled deep inside him. He had lost many soldiers, many friends, but one loss burned brighter than all the rest. His daughter, Princess Aelira, the light of his life, had disappeared during the Battle of Myrath. The battle had been fierce. Tharnian cruisers had collided with human warships in orbit, and explosions had torn through the clouds like angry storms. Aelira had led her squadron with unmatched bravery, charging ahead to protect the weaker ships. King Vareth had watched from the command tower, pride filling his chest. Then the reports had come. Her ship had gone missing. Communications were cut. No signal, no trace, nothing. Days had turned into weeks. Vareth had sent fleets in every direction, scouring the shattered remains of the battlefield. Every probe returned empty-handed. Every scout came back with silence. Each day the king forced himself to sit upon the throne, staring at the empty space where he imagined his daughter might be. But slowly a cold truth pressed in. She was gone. She had been lost to the war. The kingdom mourned with him. Ships flew black banners. Bells tolled across the planets in endless waves of sorrow. Citizens whispered her name as if speaking it aloud could bring her back. Yet for all the grief, a small part of Vareth refused to give up hope. Even as he announced the mourning period, he held on to a quiet belief that she might still be alive somewhere, waiting. Far away, in a lonely sector near the human border, a faint life signal pulsed from the wreckage of a broken moon. Aelira's escape pod had survived the initial explosion, though barely. Inside she lay unconscious, her body battered and bleeding, her armor cracked and scorched. The moon's gray surface reflected the pale light of distant stars, and silence surrounded her, cold and endless. Somewhere in the distance, a human ship approached. Its engines hummed softly as it scanned the debris field. Inside, Captain Ryan Cole had been tracking signs of life in the sector. The humans were enemies, yes, but something in his instincts pushed him toward the pod. A flicker of hope, or perhaps a spark of humanity, made him act. When he opened the pod, he found Aelira barely breathing, her strength fading with each shallow inhale. He lifted her carefully, ignoring the warning alarms. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to meet his gaze, confusion and fear dancing in their depths. For a moment neither spoke. She was a princess of an enemy empire. He was a human soldier. Yet in that instant, words were unnecessary. One life clung to the other, and in that fragile connection, something unspoken passed between them. Survival, trust, and a strange spark of hope. King Vareth sat in his throne room, unaware of the small miracle happening light years away. His heart still ached, and he had begun to imagine the worst. Yet far across the galaxy, his daughter was still alive. A small human had chosen compassion over hatred. In the shadow of war, the impossible had begun. Aelira's eyes closed again, but this time she felt warmth, a hand holding hers, steady and strong. Somewhere deep inside, she understood that she was not alone. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, hope had returned. And though her father did not yet know it, the first thread of a story that could change everything had begun. The stars above seemed indifferent, cold and distant, but a single life had survived. And in that survival, the seed of something extraordinary had been planted. Aelira awoke slowly, her head throbbing and her body aching, as if the battle itself had left marks inside her bones. The first thing she noticed was light, soft, warm, and steady. Her eyes opened fully, blinking against it, and she realized she was no longer inside the wreckage of her destroyed ship. Instead, she lay on a cot inside a small metal room, the walls humming gently with life support systems. Strange machines beeped softly around her, and a thin curtain of warmth from the room wrapped around her like a fragile shield. Then she heard it, a calm, steady voice. "Easy there. Don't try to move too quickly." Aelira's heart jumped. She turned her head slowly and saw him, a human. Not a soldier in full battle armor, but a man with tired eyes, a simple uniform, and hands that looked like they had worked hard, but had never intended to harm her. He smiled faintly, not arrogantly, but with kindness that made her chest tighten. You're human," she whispered, disbelief and fear rising at the same time. "I am," he said simply. Captain Ryan Cole, and yes, I found you in the wreckage. Illyra's mind whirled. Her father had taught her that humans were the enemy, cruel, unpredictable, and deadly. Yet here was one standing before her offering nothing but care. She tried to sit up, but her body refused. He moved quickly, gently pressing her back down. You took a bad hit, he explained. You would have died if I hadn't found you in time. Illyra's hand shook as she glanced at the bandages and the clean water he had set beside her. She could not understand why a human would help her. She had seen their ships fire upon her fleet. She had seen their weapons tear through her soldiers. And yet, this one had saved her life. Why? She asked finally, her voice soft and trembling. Ryan hesitated, then looked out the small window. Beyond it, the gray, barren surface of the moon stretched endlessly, because war makes us forget that there are people on the other side. I saw you there, injured and alone. I couldn't just leave you. The word struck her like a bolt of lightning. No one in the Tharnian Empire had ever spoken that way about a human life, especially not one of their enemies. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but her body betrayed her. Weakness kept her lying there, and exhaustion pressed down like a heavy cloak. Ryan moved closer and adjusted the blankets around her. He didn't touch her with rough hands. He only ensured she was warm and safe. His movements were calm, careful, precise, a mercy she had never expected from a human. Slowly, a strange feeling grew inside her chest. It was trust, fragile and hesitant like a sapling in barren soil. Hours passed. Ryan spoke little, only offering her water, soft words, and occasional reassurances. Illyra listened, absorbing every detail. The sound of the machines, the warmth of the room, and the human who had risked everything to save her. She had been trained to fight, to survive, to trust only her own people. Yet here she realized that trust could exist in unexpected places. At one point she whispered, I should hate you. Ryan's shoulders tensed, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Then he shook his head gently.
Hate is easy.
It's survival that's harder. I'm just glad you're alive. That's all that matters right now. Illyra closed her eyes and let the words sink in. The world was far larger and more complicated than she had believed. And somewhere in the midst of war, in the shadow of death and destruction, a human had given her a gift no one of her own people could: mercy. As night fell on the broken moon, Illyra felt a warmth she hadn't known in months. A small, fragile hope flickered inside her heart. Somewhere far away, her father mourned her loss, believing she was dead. But here in this quiet room, she was alive. And beside her, the human who had saved her watched over her as if she mattered more than the war itself. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Illyra allowed herself to breathe. She had survived. And she had a choice, though she did not yet know how that choice would shape the rest of the galaxy. Days passed slowly on the gray, lifeless moon. The small room where Illyra lay felt like a fragile haven in the midst of the galaxy's endless war. Every morning she awoke to see the same human watching over her. Captain Ryan Cole had grown quieter, but always attentive, his eyes scanning the room, then the horizon, ensuring no danger would reach them. At first, Illyra had only observed him. Her pride and training made her wary. She could not trust a human, not yet. But slowly, something began to shift. Ryan shared food with her, a simple meal of bread and protein bars, something she had never tasted before. She had expected it to be bland or strange, but the warmth of the meal and the effort he put into offering it made her pause. It's good, she admitted one day, surprised by how much her body craved not only food but care. You have to eat to get your strength back, Ryan said, smiling faintly. Even a princess needs to survive. The words made her smile too, though it was soft, almost shy. The first time she laughed since the battle, it was a sound that startled them both. The human, the enemy she had been taught to fear, could make her feel alive again. As the days stretched on, they began to talk. At first it was small things: his ship, his home planet, the strange habits of humans. Illyra shared her world in return, telling him about Tharnia's moons, the songs her mother had sung, the forests of silver trees that glowed at night. She spoke of battle too, the weight of command, the fear she had felt when she thought she might die. Ryan listened, never judging, only asking questions with a gentle curiosity. You're braver than anyone I've ever met, he said quietly one evening. After she described a dangerous mission, Elira's eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness.
I learned from my father, she whispered.
But you saved me. Without you, I wouldn't be here to say this. Ryan's hand brushed against hers for a moment, a simple touch, yet it freed a warmth she had never felt. It was human, yet profoundly honest. She had been raised to believe humans were cruel, but this single human, proved her entire world wrong. The nights were the hardest. Outside, the moon was cold and empty, and the stars shone like icy diamonds in the endless sky. Elira could not sleep well. Dreams of burning ships and falling flames haunted her. But when Ryan sat beside her, speaking in low tones, telling stories of his life and the humans he loved, the nightmares lessened. She began to feel something she had never known in the middle of war: safety. They began to work together to repair the small escape pod that had brought her here. Each day they scoured the moon's surface for parts, tools, and scrap metal. She learned to trust his judgment, and he learned hers. For hours at a time, they worked side by side, communicating in small gestures and shared effort and mutual respect. The bond between them grew stronger than either of them realized. One afternoon, as they paused to rest, Ryan looked at her seriously. "You're going to have to go back someday," he said softly. "Back to your father, back to your people." Elira's heart tightened. The thought of leaving him felt like losing a part of herself. "I know," she said, "and I don't know what that will mean. For either of us." Ryan smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "Whatever happens, I'll be glad I found you. That counts for something, doesn't it?" It did, more than anything. As the twin suns set behind the shattered moons, Elira sat in silence, watching the colors of the sky change. She had been taught to hate humans, to see them only as enemies. Yet now, sitting next to one who had saved her life, who had cared for her without asking for anything in return, she began to understand the truth. Bravery, mercy, and hope were not limited to one species. And in that understanding, a fragile but powerful connection began to grow, a bond that would shape not only her future, but perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. For the first time in months, she did not feel alone. And for the first time, the thought of returning home no longer filled her with fear. Because here, in the middle of emptiness, she had discovered something humans and perhaps all beings could offer: trust, compassion, and a chance to see enemies as friends. The gray silence of the moon was broken one morning by a faint hum in the sky. Elira and Ryan had grown used to the emptiness, the monotony of repairing the damaged escape pod, and the quiet conversations that had become their lifeline. But now the hum was different, mechanical, sharp, and alive. Ryan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. "It's a ship," he said quietly. "Not mine." "A Tharnian vessel." Elira froze. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. They found me," she whispered, fear and panic mixing in her voice. Memories of the Battle of Mayrath, the screams, the fire, the loss of her crew, all surged back in a wave of dread. Her body stiffened, her hands trembling as she realized the danger Ryan now faced. "They'll kill you," she said, her voice breaking. "If they see you here, if they know you helped me, they'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Ryan, the human who had saved her life, being executed by her own people was unbearable. Ryan stepped closer to her, his expression calm but serious. "I know," he said softly, "but there's no time to hide. We have to decide, do we stay and risk everything, or do we go?" Elira's mind raced. She could leave him behind. She could go back to her father, report that she had survived, and claim her place in the Empire once more. But the thought made her chest tighten, guilt slicing through her like a blade. She could not abandon him. "Not after everything. I can't leave you," she said firmly. "Not now. Not ever." Ryan's eyes softened and a faint smile touched his lips. "Then we do this together." The ship descended slowly, its massive hull reflecting the dull light of the twin suns. The engines hummed like a living beast, sending small tremors across the moon's surface. Elira's breath came fast, shallow, as she realized how close danger had come. She glanced at Ryan, seeing the same resolve mirrored in his eyes. When the Tharnian rescue team finally landed, soldiers poured out, their weapons raised, scanning for any sign of the lost princess. Elira stepped forward, her small frame seeming fragile against the rows of armored soldiers. But there was a strength in her eyes, a defiance that no weapon could break. "This human is under my protection," she declared, her voice clear and strong. Every word carried the weight of her survival, her trust, and the bond she had formed with Ryan. He saved me. If anything happens to him, I leave. You will lose me twice. The soldiers hesitated, unsure how to respond. A human standing in the royal court of Tharnia was unheard of, unimaginable, and yet here he was, silent and steady, standing beside the princess he had saved. Alira's heart raced as the leader of the rescue team approached, his armor gleaming in the morning light. "Princess," he said cautiously, "this human—" "I said he is under my protection," Alira interrupted firmly, her voice echoing across the landing platform. She felt a surge of power she had not realized she possessed, the power to protect life even when it defied centuries of hatred. Ryan bowed slightly, respecting the gravity of her words. He had come to understand the stakes, and he knew that now their fates were intertwined. He had saved her, and she had chosen to save him in return. As the soldiers lowered their weapons, Alira allowed herself a small, trembling breath. The battle for survival had been won, but a new challenge lay ahead, returning to Tharnia with a human at her side, knowing that the eyes of her empire would watch every move, judge every action, and test every ounce of her courage. Yet in that moment, as the twin suns cast long shadows across the gray moon, she felt a fierce pride. She had survived, she had trusted, and she had chosen mercy over fear. And for the first time since the war had begun, hope seemed not just possible, but real. Somewhere, far across the stars, her father still mourned her supposed death. But Alira knew she would return, not as a lost princess, but as one who had survived, learned, and chosen to see humanity not as an enemy, but as a friend. And beside her, Ryan would walk, alive, free, and unbroken, a symbol that even in the darkest war, compassion could shine brighter than any weapon. The Tharnian ship cut through the dark expanse of space, carrying Princess Alira home after what felt like an eternity. Her heart beat rapidly, a mixture of hope, fear, and excitement. She had survived the impossible, but now a new challenge awaited her. Her father, King Vareth, still believed she was lost. The thought of meeting him after all she had endured made her chest tighten with nerves. And beside her, Captain Ryan Cole remained silent, his eyes fixed on the view outside the ship's window, yet his presence gave her courage. The palace of Tharnia had never looked smaller in her memory. Towers of black crystal reflected the dying suns as the ship descended, and flags flapped in the cold wind of the royal landing bay. Crowds had gathered, soldiers and citizens alike anxious to see if their lost princess had truly returned. The weight of their eyes pressed on her shoulders, but she straightened herself, drawing strength from the human at her side. When the ship's doors opened, King Vareth was the first to approach. His face, pale and drawn from weeks of grief, lit with disbelief as he caught sight of her. "Alira?" he whispered, voice trembling. She stepped forward, weak but determined, and threw herself into his arms. "My daughter, I thought I had lost you," he said, his voice breaking as tears rolled down his cheeks. He held her tightly as though by clinging he could make up for all the days of absence and pain. Alira buried her face in his chest. "I am here, father, and I would not have survived without him," she whispered, nodding toward Ryan. The king straightened, his eyes following her gesture, and froze. He looked at the human standing among his guards, tall and unflinching. "A human?" His voice carried a mixture of anger, disbelief, and confusion. Ryan stepped forward carefully, bowing his head respectfully. "Your Majesty, I am Captain Ryan Cole. I saved your daughter's life. Nothing more, nothing less." Alira took her father's hand and pressed it to her heart. "Father, he saved me. Without him, I would not have returned." Her eyes shone with tears, but her voice was firm. "I trust him, and I ask you to trust him too." The court went silent. Soldiers and attendants exchanged whispers. It was unthinkable. A human in the palace of Tharnia, a symbol of the enemy, standing alive and free beside the princess. Some shouted for his capture, others for his execution. Tension gripped the room like a living thing, and Alira felt the weight of every pair of eyes upon them. She looked at her father, searching his expression. King Vareth's chest heaved as he struggled with his anger and grief. Finally, his gaze softened, and he knelt before the human. "You saved my daughter?" His voice was low, heavy with emotion. Ryan bowed his head again. "Yes, Your Majesty. I did what anyone with a conscience would do." For a moment, silence reigned. Then the king's gaze returned to Elira. He saw her pale but determined face, the courage that had survived countless battles, and the respect in her eyes for the human beside her. He saw the truth. Mercy, bravery, and loyalty did not belong to one species alone. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Then, you will not be punished. You will be honored. Because saving a life, especially my daughter's, is more important than hatred, more important than war. The court murmured, astonished. Elira's chest swelled with relief. Ryan's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. In that moment, the impossible had happened. Trust and courage had bridged the divide between species. King Vareth embraced his daughter once more, this time not with desperation, but with pride. You are my daughter, he said softly, and you have shown me that even in war, honor and humanity can exist. Elira turned to Ryan and smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Welcome to Tharnia, she whispered. And for the first time among the cold black walls of the palace, hope seemed to blossom. A new chapter had begun, for her, for Ryan, and perhaps for the entire galaxy. The palace was quiet, yet the tension in the grand hall was thicker than any storm Elira had faced in battle. Whispers ran through the crowd like wildfire. Soldiers, nobles, and advisors stared at Ryan, the human who had dared to enter the royal court alive. Some glared with hatred, others with fear. Many demanded justice, some even called for his death. The air was heavy with centuries of suspicion, prejudice, and unspoken anger. Elira stood tall beside him, her hands clenched at her sides. Her chest heaved not with fear but with determination. She had faced explosions, the vacuum of space, and death itself, and she would not now turn away from the human who had given her life back. Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. He saved me. Without him I would be gone. And if you harm him, I will leave. You will lose me twice. A hush fell across the hall. The generals exchanged uncertain glances, their rigid faces betraying shock at her defiance. Some grumbled, fists tightening around the hilts of their weapons. Yet Elira did not flinch. She had learned in the wreckage of battle that courage was not the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. King Vareth's face was unreadable. He had always ruled with strength, commanding respect with authority and fear. Yet now he felt something unfamiliar. The stirring of understanding mingled with pride, grief, and an ache that only a parent could know. He looked at his daughter, standing firm for life, loyalty, and mercy. And he looked at the human beside her, who had acted with honor when his own empire had failed. The king's chest rose and fell as he struggled with his next words. Why, did you save her? His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but every eye in the hall turned to Ryan. Ryan bowed his head slightly, because she deserved to live. That's all, and maybe if one life is saved, the war doesn't win. His voice carried calm honesty, and it struck the king with an unexpected force. Vareth closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of his grief pressing down. He thought of every life lost in the war, every battle that had left planets burning, every soldier who had fallen, and then he thought of his daughter alive and unbroken, standing before him because someone had chosen mercy over hatred. Slowly, the king opened his eyes. They softened and he let out a long breath. Mercy, courage, honor, he muttered. These are the values of Tharnia, and yet I have often forgotten them. He turned fully to the hall, raising his hand. This human who saved my daughter shall not be punished. He shall be honored, not for being human, not for being an enemy, but for acting as all warriors should act, with honor, with courage, and with mercy. Gasps filled the room. Some soldiers dropped their hands from their weapons. Others whispered to one another in disbelief. But Elira's chest swelled with relief. She stepped closer to Ryan, squeezing his hand in silent gratitude. He looked at her, eyes bright with quiet pride, and gave her a faint, reassuring smile. The king's voice grew stronger as he addressed the entire court. We have spent too long blinded by fear and hatred. Today we are reminded that life is greater than war, that courage is not defined by species, and that hope can be found even in the darkest moments. Tears formed in Elira's eyes. The room, once tense with suspicion, now seemed lighter, filled with a fragile sense of possibility. She looked at her father and then at Ryan, understanding that the choice he had made, the trust she had placed, and the courage they had both shown could change more than just one life. It could change the empire itself. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, King Vareth smiled. Not the stern, commanding smile of a ruler, but the gentle, proud smile of a father who had seen the strength of his daughter and the value of mercy. Elira felt hope surge inside her. The human beside her, the man who had saved her life, would not only live, but he would be honored. And in that moment she realized something she had never believed possible. Enemies could become friends. War could give way to understanding, and humanity, even human humanity, could shine brighter than any star in the galaxy. As the court slowly began to settle, whispers of admiration replacing shouts of anger, Elira allowed herself a deep breath. The battle outside the palace walls had been won by fire and steel, but the battle within hearts, the battle for mercy, understanding, and courage had been won by something far stronger. And for the first time, the future of Tharnia seemed filled not with fear but with hope. The night had passed, and dawn broke over Tharnia with colors that the king had not seen for many years. The black skies of war were slowly giving way to soft shades of gold and orange, painting the palace towers in warm light. Princess Elira stood on the balcony with Captain Ryan Cole beside her, watching the sun rise over the city she had once thought she would never see again. Below them, the palace courtyard stirred with life. Soldiers and citizens moved with cautious optimism, whispers of hope replacing the fear and anger that had once gripped the empire. Her father, King Vareth, joined them silently. The lines of grief that had marked his face were softened now, replaced by something stronger: pride, understanding, and a flicker of peace. He looked at his daughter, standing tall despite all she had endured, and then at the human who had saved her life. For a long moment, the three of them watched the sunrise in silence, sharing a fragile sense of unity that had been impossible only days before. This feels different," Elira said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. She looked at Ryan, then at her father. "I thought coming home would be only relief. But it is more than that. It is hope." Ryan nodded, his gaze steady. "Hope is stronger than fear, and sometimes all it takes is one act of courage to remind everyone what really matters." King Vareth took a deep breath. He felt the weight of his empire on his shoulders, the responsibility of countless lives that had been lost or broken by centuries of war. Yet he also felt something new, a sense that perhaps the future could be different, shaped not only by power but by wisdom, mercy, and courage. He turned to the crowd in the courtyard below and raised his hand. Soldiers and nobles stopped their work. Citizens paused their conversations. The king's voice carried across the plaza, clear and strong, yet soft enough to hold care and conviction. "Today," he began, "we have seen something remarkable. A human, once our enemy, saved my daughter's life, and she in turn has chosen to protect him. This act of bravery and mercy shows us that even in the darkest times, hope can survive, and that hope can guide us toward a future greater than war, greater than fear." A murmur spread through the crowd. Soldiers lowered their weapons. Some nodded slowly, understanding that courage and honor did not belong to one species alone. Children in the streets looked up in wonder at the strange sight of human and Tharnian standing together, side by side. Elira turned to Ryan and smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "You've changed everything," she said. "Not just for me, but for all of Tharnia." Ryan shook his head. "You changed everything. I only did what anyone should do. You trusted me. That's what made the difference." King Vareth stepped forward, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder and then on Ryan's. "Perhaps this is how peace begins," he said softly. "Not through conquest, not through fear, but through trust, courage, and understanding. One life saved, one choice made, can change the path of an entire empire." The sun climbed higher, illuminating the palace and the city beyond. Elira felt warmth flood through her chest. For the first time in years, she did not feel the weight of war pressing down on her. For the first time, she saw a future where mercy and humanity could survive, even thrive, in a galaxy that had once forgotten them. She looked at Ryan, at her father, and then at the rising sun. The stars of yesterday's battles were fading, replaced by the light of a new day. And in that light, she understood that their story was more than survival. It was a beginning where enemies could become friends, where compassion could overcome hatred, and where hope could rise even in the darkest corners of the universe. And for the first time in a long time, Princess Elira smiled fully, her heart free. She had returned alive. She had trusted, and she had chosen to see the good in others. And as the new dawn broke over Tharnia, she knew that together, human and Tharnian, they could face anything. The galaxy outside the palace was vast and uncertain, but inside the heart of the Empire, light had returned. Hope had returned,